Super heavyweights in Smash have routinely struggled to garner any meaningful results in competitive ever since the very first title. While rushdown fighters trade power and weight for speed and mobility, these guys trade speed and mobility for power and weight. On paper, that may seem like a balanced trade-off. Realistically, however, those four attributes are seldom valued on equal footing, causing the former group to be far more practical and therefore more popular and successful. Smash Ultimate aimed to bridge that gap, not only introducing two new super heavies in the form of King K. Rool and Incineroar, but also revamping the archetype as a whole by giving them more ways to fight back against a more speedy opponent. Their efforts have been mostly successful in this regard. While nimble fighters are still at the top, we've seen noticeably higher representation and performance from just about all super heavies. Well, all except one. Ganondorf has been a mainstay within Smash Bros for over 20 years, but has historically never made it out of the Junior Varsity League despite having been in 4 separate titles. Even in Melee, where he shows up more frequently, his standing in tier lists has depreciated over time, consequently giving him one of the worst placements in all of Smash history. And though he did benefit from Universal Systems changes as well as a few personal buffs, Ganondorf has been colloquially agreed upon as the worst character in the game. A statement that's humorously contested by just about everyone who's had the displeasure of running into a good one in Wi-Fi. So let's clarify all of that today by going through exactly why no one plays Ganondorf. Public opinion on Ganondorf is extremely confusing for anyone looking in from outside. On one hand, you hear from just about every top player that Ganondorf is the single worst character period, or if we're being charitable, bottom 5. But on the other hand, everyone suffers from post-traumatic stress of getting doled out at 30% and dying on Elite Smash, usually followed by some salty copium statement on Twitter that Ganondorf is secretly high tier and top players are underrating him to all hell. There's actually one really popular yet hyper-specific example brought up to feed the confirmation bias of anyone who believes Ganon is OP, and I'm willing to bet all of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Nairo vs Light at Collision 2019. Okay, first of all, that's one single instance and not enough empirical data to firmly conclude how good or bad he is, although that was still one of the most hyped sets of all time. Anyways, Ganon for all intents and purposes is the truest definition of what a super heavyweight is. Extremely slow and clunky frame data, but great endurance and brutally high kill power, easily wiping you off the face of the earth in 2 or 3 successful neutral interactions. He possesses some of the worst physics in the entire game in every possible field. The wiki says he has the 7th slowest walking speed, 4th slowest dashing speed, 3rd slowest air speed, 6th lowest air acceleration and jump and double jump heights, making him one of the least mobile fighters in Smash. They try to offset this by him being the 5th heaviest character in the game, so while he gets beat up a lot, he can survive for a long time. In concept. Ganon, like most other heavyweights, is a hybrid between a brawler and a grappler. Thanks to his Flame Choke and Dark Dive, he has 2 reasonably effective command grabs to supplement his raw power. And aside from maybe Bowser, it would be safe to say he has the highest raw force in the game period, with almost all of his moves being able to nuke your stock at double-digit %, leading to his biggest yet unfortunately only positive aspect. He's one of the scariest characters in the game to get hit by. The universal improvements to landing lag in Ultimate were a major boon for him since most of his effective pressure is tied to his aerials, which have surprisingly good frame data for his class. His neutral air is quite notorious among the community for how effective it is on a character like him, and would potentially be even more effective on someone faster. Coming out of frame 7 and having long-lasting hitboxes as well as surprisingly good range, it still boasts a serviceable amount of kill power, a trait shared across his other aerials too. Forward and back air, when sweet spotted, have often been equated to aerial smash attacks, while up air is a good follow-up tool that ends at a very good angle, and down air is one of the strongest meteor spikes in the game and something many people are afraid of getting hit by whether on stage or off stage. Also during his transition to Ultimate, Ganon received new smash attacks, finally making use of a sword, something players have been begging for since Melee. Each of his smash attacks rank among the slowest in startup of their kind, but possess some of the best range and power in the entire game, notably his forward and up smash. The former being infamous for how ridiculously strong it is, especially in tandem with Rage, and the latter for having enough coverage to strike an entire battlefield platform. I'm sure many of us miss the old up smash he used to have, but overall, I would say his new sword attacks were a buff to him since heavyweights traditionally rely on punishing careless aggression, and his forward and up smashes are fantastic whiff punishes. Ganon's monstrous power is the premier reason why there's such a divisive opinion on him by the community. How can someone who destroys you in 2 or 3 neutral interactions be the worst character in the game? You would think, in the hands of a top player who can find those moments of vulnerability in their opponent, Ganondorf would be a perfect choice to them, right? As an answer to that, just as having one weakness does not invalidate someone with a lot of strengths, one strength does not validate someone with a lot of weaknesses, one of which essentially cancels out the virtue of being strong. Ganon's immense power and deceptively good range are all virtually negated by his inability to take the initiative with those tools. When it comes to pressure, he has some of the best in the game. 2 command grabs, immense damage output translating to very high shield damage, and most importantly, access to rising aerials in a game that's very air-to-air combat heavy. but he can't fully make use of it because of how pathetic his movement is. In a way, he's a more extreme version of Incineroar, a character who's famous for having an incredible moveset that's only really hindered by his poor mobility. Thing is, in a platform fighter where positioning takes precedence over everything, mobility matters a lot. His incapacity to close distance and create space makes him unable to consistently use his raw force to his advantage. Sonic, Fox, and Greninja, to name a few, can simultaneously avoid his attacks by running circles around them and get up in his face and outframe data him using their speed. Without the means to catch up to his opponents or run away from them, Ganon lacks one of the most crucial tools responsible for a strong neutral game. Not sure how many of you saw Dragon Ball Z as a kid, but remember when Trunks was powering up after Cell knocked out Vegeta, and despite Cell himself declaring that Trunks' power vastly overshadowed his own, Trunks would never be able to beat him. In that very episode, Goku tries the same power up himself and realizes the downgrade in speed from all those bulky muscles makes all of that power useless. That's basically Ganon. He's got so much power, too much power, that it slows him down. He has no way to exert that power against an opponent who is aware of his threat range and knows how to kite him out. The other heavyweights don't suffer from this issue too much for varying reasons. Bowser, Donkey Kong, Charizard, and Kazuya are actually quite fast on the ground, giving them no trouble in chasing after fleeing enemies. Meanwhile, K. Rool and DDD have access to projectiles, granting the option of playing range and forcing their opponents to approach them. Now you might say Ganon has 2 burst movement options through Flame Choke or Wizard's Foot. True, except both are highly committal, so if you miss, you're a sitting duck. If you have to choose between general movement and burst movement, it's always better to have general movement, or your burst movement should be mix-upable like Steve's minecart and anvil, where you can choose when to jump off and convert it into a projectile. Due to this, for the majority of his neutral, Ganon is forced to remain in place or occasionally nudge himself closer to his opponent and throw out attacks hoping they'll either run into it or mistime a parry or spot dodge. But that goes back to what I said earlier about being unable to take the initiative. In most situations, Ganon relies on his opponent making mistakes or not knowing the matchup, hence why on Wi-Fi he feels like the best character in the game, because 1. Wi-Fi makes it harder for players to react to his stray hits in neutral, and 2. Everyone on Wi-Fi sucks. Top players know exactly how to invalidate all of Ganon's pressure. More importantly, they also know how to exploit his weaknesses, leading me to the second problem and the most obvious one. Ganon has the most exploitable recovery in the game, bar none. Worse than Little Mac, worse than Dr. Mario, worse than Incineroar, worse than Chrom, and ironically cancels out his amazing resilience. You're starting to see a pattern here, right? His power is nullified by his bad mobility, and his weight is thrown out the window by his poor recovery. In case you're wondering how Ganon has the worst recovery in the game, even though Dark Dive has a rather decent diagonal vertical reach while we have Little Mac or Chrom, remember that it's not distance alone that makes her a good recovery. I mean, it helps. No one can deny that Byleth's tether range is absurd. But what's more important than distance is mix-ups. It doesn't matter how far off stage you can recover from if that's your only way to recover. So while Dr. Mario and Little Mac may seem a lot more gimbable, they at least have options to mix up or protect themselves. Dr. Mario can throw pills to cover his movement back and use Tornado to get more horizontal space. Little Mac has Jolt Haymaker for horizontal reach and Counter for deterring edgeguard attempts. Ganondorf has nothing, and before you say Flame Choke for horizontal movement, unlike Tornado and Haymaker, Flame Choke sends him into freefall, and even if you grab someone to take with them, he dies first, so you can't use it in last stock situations, meaning he has to recover almost the same way every time. Directional air dodge, double jump, and then dark dive from below. Thankfully, Dark Dive has an attack at the very end of the animation which can protect him from being two-framed, but overall, he has the worst recovery due to his mix-up options, or lack thereof. Ganon's awful recovery makes him, ironically, a high-risk, high-reward glass cannon despite his weight. A single mistake can lead to either player losing a stock at 0%. While he can effortlessly delete stocks in 2 or 3 hits, opponents can do the same to him. All they have to do is get him off stage and hit him once and he's probably dead. In fact, if we go back to the Nairo Light set, Light almost never went off stage versus Nairo. I can understand why. Fox is super squishy and Light doesn't want to expose himself any more than he needs to, but simply doing a run off Nair or Shine is all you need to win. Fighting a heavyweight on stage is the worst thing you can do. To beat them, you have to keep them in disadvantage as much as possible. You'll almost certainly lose if you're trying to kill them the old-fashioned way because they can naturally face tank harder than you, so the more neutral interactions it takes, the more chances they have to annihilate your soul. That's their whole shtick. Recovery isn't just about getting back on stage, but escaping disadvantage in general. Ganon has issues in this department as well. Like other heavies, he's got a relatively big hurt box, making him easy to hit. He's also heavy, which makes him easy to combo and or juggle. His fastest aerial is neutral air at frame 7, not the worst, but not fast enough to escape even slightly untrue combos, and he has a frame 4 air dodge. Being unable to escape combos makes him more likely to be thrown off stage or juggle for tons of percent. To reiterate, while he can use Wizard's Foot to descend fast, if he lands, he's stuck for 41 frames, almost 3/4 of a second, enough for most characters to charge a forward smash. It's only recommended to use down B if you're so far above the stage to where you can auto-cancel it. In his defense, all heavyweights have subpar disadvantages, but the reason it's worse on Ganon is because of all the other factors I mentioned earlier, namely his really poor neutral. Similarly to recovery, a character's weight isn't the only thing that matters in how much survival they have. Endurance is less about how much damage you can sustain and more about how little you expose yourself to damage, such as having attacks that are safe on shield, long range, high mobility to avoid attacks, out of shield options to avoid being cornered, projectiles to exert pressure from a distance, anything that prevents you from getting thrown into hit stun. Once again, Ganon is the only super heavy who doesn't have ways to remedy this. Every other heavyweight can bolster their endurance to some extent. Bowser has a frame 6 out of shield option in the form of Whirling Fortress, an excellent get-off-me tool which heavyweights desperately need. K. Rool has 2 long-range projectiles, a reflector, and belly armor, letting his attacks overpower yours even if you strike first. Donkey Kong has super armor on neutral, side, and up B for the same basic principle as K. Rool. DDD has Gordo for neutral and multi-jumps to mix up when and how he lands and recovers. Charizard has a frame 6 up smash out of shield and a frame 9 up B out of shield, and you know, he can switch to Squirtle and Ivysaur at a moment's notice. Incineroar has revenge to one-shot you, Kazuya has a laser, the strongest reflector in the game, the safest attack on shield in the game, and more intangibility frames than the number of Smash players who have girlfriends. Ganon has almost nothing to his name. Having a command grab out of shield does mean he can punish characters who landing aerial into shield too much, but he doesn't really have practical super armor, only Warlock Punch, which is a joke attack, let's be real. He also has no effective response against projectiles, and his down B gets completely snuffed out by them, which I actually didn't know until I watched Mockrock's video. It would have been really good for him if during Wizard's Foot he would blast right through projectiles to make it more useful for approaches. Lastly, he doesn't have any way to pressure opponents into approaching him, no projectile or anything, so he has to approach even though he's awful at it. I wasn't kidding when I said Ganon's only virtue is power, but without any semblance of utility or mobility, it doesn't matter how much power you have. Having only power is like having a sword that's too heavy to wield. What sucks is that Ganon actually has a lot of stuff going for him. Some of his moves individually are fantastic. We already talked about neutral air, up air is also great, back air is ludicrously strong for how fast it is. Imagine if this was on a faster character like Fox. I bet you, Light would trade Fox's back air for Ganon's in a heartbeat. He also has a phenomenal dash attack, easily like top 10. Down tilt and forward tilt are pretty solid, so on and so forth. All the same, he has a few blatantly useless attacks like up tilt and Warlock Punch that, if they were replaced, could do so many things for him. Actually, they did. I'm not sure how many of you keep up with the modding scene, but Ultimate S is a mod that reworks movesets for characters, and one that they did for Ganon was replace his neutral B with an attack that lets him float in all directions for a short period of time, so like a better version of Peach and Daisy float, and they made his up tilt a combo starter. Personally, I'm not much of a Zelda fan, so I don't know where that neutral B was inspired from, but those two moves would instantly make Ganon mid-tier at the least. Neutral B alone would be more than sufficient. If they gave him that float in the main game, it wouldn't repair all of his issues, but it would do wonders for his tournament viability. The float gives him options on stage, recovery options, landing options. That's what Ganon is sorely missing. Options. If he had more options, more people would use him. It's a cool twist of fate that a character with such overwhelming strength, a character with the moniker of the King of Darkness, is the weakest character in the game. In a way, it is a testament to how close the gap between the worst and the best is in Smash Ultimate. Ultimate Ganondorf is certainly no melee Bowser. He has the firepower to bust the bunker under the bunker he just busted, but he needs the options to tap into that power, and it really sucks that for all the source material they have to draw new innovative moves from, he still feels like a Captain Falcon Echo Fighter. But there you have it, hope this was insightful. Let me know your thoughts on Ganon in the comments down below, whether you agree or disagree with my points. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like and sub to the channel, really helps me out. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.